Okay, one other thing that you probably should do is put yourself, if you haven't done already, on speaker mode. And we can start. Well, I want to welcome everyone to the March SAAA Archaeology Month meeting. As most of us know, March is Archaeology Month. We normally have an event, and for most of you, you're probably aware we are running an event in March. On the 12th, we're having a archaeology tour of Fish Island starting at 10 a.m., probably lasting to 11:30. It's limited to members and there's a limited number. There's still some positions available. So in a moment, we'll put on Janet Fitty's email address. If you have not signed up, she's the one who's tallying it. In fact, if you look at the chat, that's her email, arkyfit@verizon.net. So there are some spaces available. Just want to mention that, and of course, dress appropriately. We're going to be walking through the woods, and it's on a Saturday. There probably will be enough parking in the business area, which is adjacent to the Fish Island area. And we can all meet at 10 o'clock at the in the little corral parking area before we're entering. Yeah, Marcia, you got something to add?
I sent a notice to JB that we were going to be doing this, and he said that he was leading a tour at 8 a.m. for Audubon. So they'll be leaving at about the same time we're arriving. So don't go get confused and go off with the birders.
Yeah, we have a better tour anyway, so we're going on to 10 o'clock.
Additional parking next door.
You just said that.
Okay, thank you. Being Archaeology Month, it's also the month that the dues are due. I know normally we've been meeting and we're collecting at the meeting, but let me just refresh everyone's memory. The dues are due in March. The individual dues are $15, a family is $20. You can take a check and mail it in if you like, along with your name and post office address and your email address and phone number. And you can mail it into SAAA. And it's a post office box in St. Augustine, and the PO box is 1301. And it's St. Augustine 32085. The other option you have, if you go on SAAA Shutterfly, you'll get that information as well. I just gave you, but you can also pay online with the Square system. You can put your credit card. So we'll be looking for renewals, and we'll go from there. We have some good news. We got some bad news. The bad news is we don't have an artifact of the month. I think the St. Augustine City archaeologists have been out for a week or so. But the good news is you'll probably be able to see the artifact in person next month, because we're hoping to have the next meeting, which is the 5th of April at the Flagler Room, and you'll be able to pick up the artifact and examine it before you guess what it is. And the next meeting, as I said, is the 5th of April. So stay tuned. We'll let you know if there's any change in plans and we have to go on the Zoom. We're trying to work out how we can possibly do a live meeting and a Zoom meeting concurrently. So details to follow, just stay tuned. I think Sarah Miller, I saw you on. You got any announcements from FBAN?
Yes, I do. Happy Archaeology Month.
All right.
March 1st, and we were out and in it today, and I was just going to share my screen. If you are signed up for our emails, you would have gotten something looking like this. It has events coming up, such as tonight's talk with Dr. Lori Lee. We have another talk March 24th, Bittersweet, Florida's role in the historic sugar industry, that Emily Jane will be giving, and that is the second in our 3-part Zoom evening series this spring. I'll be talking about nails, not manicures, but architectural nails next month in April, but don't miss Emily Jane's talk. We have been doing a lot of work out at the NER, and folks can come help us. We're trying to arrange some monitoring days with the volunteers out there on Mondays, but we are doing right now, I am just fresh out of the field from doing some mapping with our Arrow Gold, and it's a really interesting process. We are getting like sub-centimeter accuracy on our mapping. So it's really cool. And you guys are invited. Come out March 28th and 29th from 10 until 2. We'll be doing some mapping activities, so you can RSVP to Emily Jane if you're interested in coming out, and you too can hold what we're calling the wizarding staff rather than science stick. For some reason that sounded more sciencey, but help us collect data on the shorelines. And we just got our modeling data from Lindsay Cochran today. So that is going great. And then March 11th, I'm going to be giving a talk for our North American Heritage at Risk series on 9 a.m. on what we found out after our 2-year study. So thanks to SAAA, and you've been hearing bits about our special category grant that wrapped, but now we have some really nice and tight results to share with you from that 2-year study. And again, thanks to SAAA for helping. And then a familiar face will be our March 25th speaker, Brendan Burke. And he's going to be talking about what he's been doing along the rivers in Virginia, and also heritage that is at risk from the climate crisis. So that is what's coming up with FPAN. And back to you, Don.
Okay, okay, thank you, Sarah. Let me introduce our speaker today. It's Lori Lee. She's with the Department of Humanities at Flagler College. She's a keen and distinguished professor of liberal education in anthropology, and the anthropology program coordinator, and a past SAAA officer. She spent some time at Fort Mose this past summer, and we're going to hear about it now. So, Lori, it's all yours.
Lori is muted.
Is she muted?
She's trying to find the button. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
We can see you and the screen, so you're good to go. Just start the PowerPoint and we're in business.
The magic of PowerPoint. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. I think of those things that you just mentioned, my affiliation with the SAAA is one of my proudest accomplishments. So I'm really glad to be here and talk with you this evening. And thinking about what to talk to you all about is tricky, because many of you have been in St. Augustine longer than I have. You know a lot about Fort Mose and what's gone on there before. And we're still in the middle stages of our analysis. So I decided to sort of give you a picture of some of the work that we've been doing, and really talk about what our research goals are, and how they build upon the work that's been done in the past, and how the model for doing community-based archaeology that Kathy started has been really inspiring, and something that we are striving to continue in the present. And we'll talk to you about how we've done that, and how this model, this sort of teacher-scholar model in terms of working with students, working with the community, has really resulted in some interesting findings for us, and plans we hope for in the future, directions we hope for in the future. So that's sort of where I'm headed with this. But here you can see, looking at the island where Fort Mose 2 was located, and I'll show you maps again in a minute, and you can see the tarp up in the background where we would have lunch. And so when you look at this island, you can see many things, and that's one of the things I want to touch on, is all the stakeholders involved here. When you look at this island, you see a landform that has shell from Native American activities in the past? Do you see the remains of the first free Black settlement in what became the United States? Do you see a good place to go fishing? Do you see a good place to go birding? Do you see do you see a place where you can go and camp for the weekend? All of these things are aspects of the past which have been used. So, and when I think about this location in a very specific way, in terms of Fort Mose 2 and the site, but then also how the connections within the broader community in St. Augustine, and how this is certainly all of our history, and why that's important and why it matters today. I was really struck, as you all know, it's been a difficult couple of weeks. My favorite anthropologist, Paul Farmer, died suddenly last week, and he works for Partners in Health, and well, he does a number of things. And I was asked to go speak to some students about him in a different class, and it was political science class and international studies students. And after we got done talking about all this brilliant work he's done in bringing healthcare and trying to make healthcare a universal human right, a student raised her hand and said, "I don't know how to ask this, but why should I care?" So it's really in the mind of this question, right? Why should people care about this? And I think that's a question that that people who've been working at this location have had to answer time and again because of different historical and social contexts. And I think it's important that we be mindful of that, and we need to always be prepared to answer that question: why should you care? And there's so many great and important reasons to care about this site, as you all know. So before I get started, I just wanted to, this is showing the slides really weirdly. It's fine. So I just wanted to be sure that you're aware that this project that I'm doing at Fort Mose since 2019 is a collaboration between myself and James Davidson initially. We'd done some work at Bulow Plantation together before. He started there long before I did. And then I had 2 field schools join his. And then we shifted to Fort Mose. And when we made that shift, and even when we were working at Bulow, Liz Ibarola, who you see in the center here, was a graduate student at UF and is now tenure track at University of Texas at Austin. So we are all 3 co-PIs on this site. So when I'm talking about the research, I'm talking about our project that we're all working on together. So I don't want you to assume I'm only speaking for myself, though any errors that I make, I certainly take responsibility for. So in addition to, I'll get to our goals in a minute, but certainly our focus is on learning more, or as much as we can, about the lives of the free people the free Blacks who lived at the fort and worked at the fort, and the Indigenous community members who were intermarried with them as well. What remains of that in this area before it is inundated by sea level rise. So on the left, that image that you see is a picture that we took last summer. It was just, it's cropped out of this image, but it was done with a SoLocator app so that we could document exactly where this is. So we, in addition to human impacts at the site, and there are a significant number of those. There are weather-related impacts. There are, in terms of storms and hurricanes, boats. And this is one of the trees that's just fallen over on the island, and it's got a lot of artifacts in its roots. So this is a piece of creamware, 1762, and then below that, which you don't see in this image, is a piece of St. John's Plain. So it's really important that we can figure out as much as we can about this history before it is inundated by water. And to that end, that picture that I took for Heritage Monitoring Scouts and FPAN program that you're all familiar with. And when I started out saying that, I wanted to show you the 3 people that were working on the project, there really is a whole world of people who are helping this happen, that we couldn't do this project without. So in these just few images I selected, you can see Fort Mose Historical Society, you can see FPAN, you can see LAMP, you can see Carl Halbert, Kathy Deegan, Thomas Jackson. So all of these folks have been very generous with their time and expertise and helping us think through this, helping us with logistics, helping us get out to the site. So it really is a project that couldn't succeed literally without the help of all of these folks. So we're all familiar with the location of Fort Mose, I think, just north of the city, a couple miles north. And you can see its location here on Robinson Creek. And in terms of historic sites in St. Augustine, certainly you're aware that the pioneering work in African American archaeology really took place with Charles Fairbanks from University of Florida and Kathy Deegan and their work. And what we're doing really seeks to build upon what they started. So the original Fort Mose 1, that we call Fort Mose 1, was built in 1738 and survived until 1740 when it was destroyed so that the British couldn't occupy it. So again, at this time, 1730 and 1739, there were about 38 men and some families in residence at this location. So if you're not familiar with the history of the site, it's important that you know that African and African American people were given sanctuary if they would come and be willing to convert two things: convert to Catholicism, and secondly, serve in the military as a frontier against the British for the Spanish. So that is how the fort got situated here, and it was an effective means of keeping the British at bay, as you can see by the fact that when the British came in 1740, it was destroyed to keep them from occupying it. And then the folks at Fort Mose went and lived in St. Augustine. And Jane Landers and Kathy Deegan have both written extensively about that, and amazing historical work. I know Kathy's often says that the most important thing that's come out of this project has been the history. And I know that Jane is still working on it. And so there's a wealth of material there that I encourage you to read if you're not familiar with it. But in so the Spanish government wanted the folks that were living at Fort Mose to leave the city and move back out to the site. And they were kind of reluctant to do so for a couple of reasons. They had intermarried some of them with folks who lived in town. And also they complained about the quality of their health when they were out at the location of the second fort. So this is the location of the second fort that was occupied from 1752 to 1763. So although they were reluctant, they were required to go back out to the fort, and so they did. And so it's here where Kathy and her students were doing fieldwork in 1987, 1988, that they found remains of the second fort. And building on that work, we've been continuing looking for those domestic spaces out at the site, and as well as documenting things like climate change and weather impacts to the site. So here is a drawing of what that hypothetical reconstruction by Albert Minucci based on historical resources. And you can see that it goes right along the edge of the fort, and there was no wall along that fort. I'll talk about it more in a minute. And here's an image of our students heading out to the site in 2019. So I'll get to this in a minute, this process of how we got through there. So let's see. Well, I guess I'll go back. I keep glossing over the history because I assume you all know, but that's probably not a fair assumption. So Fort Mose, the first one, I'll go back for a second, was a small fortified settlement founded in 1738 by the Spanish governor of East Florida, Manuel Montiano, and populated by emancipated Africans. And Mosé served as an advanced defensive settlement, the primary settlement of St. Augustine, some 2 miles to the south. The fort and its accompanying settlement were populated by free Africans, many of whom were runaway slaves from the adjacent British colonies in the Carolinas and Georgia, with Spanish authorities notably granting asylum to runaway Africans. Both the physical settlement of Mosé and what it stood for symbolically were seen as a direct threat to maintaining control over the enslaved population in the British colonies. So the original Fort Mosé had a small population. As I said before, 38 men with some families were in residence. And the first fort was a small enclosure that was, quote, built of earth and logs about 20 yards square with a moat filled with Spanish bayonets surrounding it, end quote. So the houses built by the Africans were described by the Spanish as simple thatched structures that resembled Native American lodgings. The Africans who inhabited the community of Mosé throughout its varied history and both of its incarnations would have spoken multiple languages, including Spanish, English, possibly French, one of several varieties of Muskogean languages, and in addition to several distinct African languages. When Mosé was founded, British citizens traveled from Carolina to St. Augustine in an attempt to recover their runaway Africans, but the Spanish governor rebuffed their efforts, citing the Royal Edict of 1733, which mandated that the Spanish provide religious sanctuary to any who sought the Catholic faith. The Africans declared to the King of Spain that they would serve as the most cruel enemies of the English and would spill their last drop of blood in defense of the great crown of Spain and the Holy Faith. Certainly the British believed that the Spanish were actively sending African agents into Carolina to instigate desertions and slave revolts. And one implied result was the Stono Rebellion, which occurred in South Carolina in 1739. And finally, the fort was attacked by British forces under General Oglethorpe in 1740 during the War of Jenkins' Ear. And the British briefly held the fort, but a counterattack by the Spanish drove them out. Abandoned after the battle, the settlement was eventually reestablished in 1748, and in 1752, a second larger fort was built in a location just north of the original installation. The second fort is described as being 3 sides with 2 bastions on the northwest and southwest corners, constructed of earth and logs and surrounded by a Spanish bayonet-filled moat. At least 4 cannons were placed within the newly reconstituted fort. Its interior included a church built of board and thatch, and residence for the Franciscan priests, and potentially 6 other structures. Additionally, approximately 22 households named in the 1759 census were likely built outside the fort's walls. The reoccupation of Mosé by the African citizenry of St. Augustine in 1748 was done reluctantly, as I said before, under the direct order of the Spanish governor. So the reluctance was due in part to fear of another attack by English or Native Americans, but the governor noted that it was motivated by a desire for total freedom without conditions. So they had, it was conflicting opinions on this. The second fort was ultimately abandoned in 1763 when Florida was ceded to the British at the end of the 7 Years' War by the Treaty of Paris, marking the beginning of Florida's British period. And the colony's inhabitants were relocated to Cuba. And the location of the first fort is hypothesized as being located underwater near Fort Mosé II, which they discovered with satellite imagery. And so that's something else we're interested in looking at more in the future. So the logistical hurdles of working at this site are very many, but most can be reduced to its location. Being located on an island gets complicated to get there. So in 2019, we walked or waded out to the island every day, and to move our heaviest equipment, we had the benefit of the St. Augustine Lighthouse Archaeological Maritime Program to help us ferry our supplies back and forth to the island. And because our walking to the path, because our walking path to the site crosses through a salt marsh, state and park officials decided that beginning in 2021, we should begin only accessing the site by boat in order to protect the natural resources. Fortunately, as it turned out, our land partners were willing to transport us to and from the site for the entire 2021 season, as that turned out. So we got very lucky there. All right, so given those, just going back for a second, given those logistics, then we had hurdles of access and travel times, quickly forming afternoon thunderstorms, the depth and complexity of the site's deposits, and limited by the number of people we could have on the island at a time. Then in 2019, we excavated 7 1x2 meter units to a depth of 70 centimeters. So we were able to accomplish what we thought at that point was a good amount of work, but we were a little disappointed. We'd hoped to do more, but we learned in 2021 that we should have been grateful for what we had. So it went really well. And based on the work of Kathy Deegan and her students, we had some clues as to what to look for when we would get to the period that indicated the first Spanish period. So here's a shell lens dating to that first Spanish period, which is described really well in her field notes. And here's an image of this shell lens in profile. And at the bottom of that, you can see a feature, feature 8, at the base of that, which, as always happens in archaeology field schools, appears in the last couple of days of field school. But we were able to excavate that and profile it and get that out. So we're still working with the floating the remains of that. So this particular feature was a rectangular pit, was dug into and through the first Spanish period shell lens. And so it's deeper vertically than the first Spanish period. It actually dates to the second Spanish period, likely to the 1790s, based on the artifacts associated with it. And we also found additional features related to Native American presence at the site. We found a number of posts and that we excavated. And we found more of those at the end of the field season that we covered up and backfilled to return to in 2021. But as it turned out, we didn't have time to do that. So we hope to do that in 2022. So we can get a better sense of the pattern. And I'll show you an image of how and why we're doing that in a minute. So here's an image of our 2019 research design, and this ArcGIS map just shows the excavation area. Just by that, I mean the boundaries of the site as we are thinking of it. The small squares that you see were where we proposed putting shovel tests before we realized that most of that area had already been shovel tested. And the blue areas are where previous excavations had been done by Kathy and her students. So I didn't realize today that I don't have the formal map yet. It has not been sent to me by my colleagues. So today I just threw in this quick sketch map. So apologize, this is not to scale, but these are the units that we excavated based on where Kathy and her students were finding concentrations of domestic materials. So we really wanted to explore those areas more. And it turned out to be a good plan. So we ultimately have 11 excavation units in that you can see. And in 2021, we were only able to add 4 new 1x2 meter units. And we reopened another unit that we'd only gotten halfway through in 2019. But because of the conditions of the soil, we weren't even able to complete that one. So these look fairly shallow, and this is still somewhat early on in the field school, but in truth, we didn't get very deep in most of our units, about 40 centimeters in 2021 as compared to 70 in 2019. And that was partly due, again, to the logistical changes. So getting to the site by boat certainly is a better option for protecting the marshland, but it means that we had to take several boat trips to get to the site and several boat trips to get from the site. And we had to pay closer attention to tides and weather so that we could get out, so that we could keep everybody safe. So our field time was reduced by about 50% in 2021. So we're looking at ways and working with the parks, who are also our partners in this, to improve on that in the future. Unit 11 that you see here, Liz is taking a photo of that. One of the things we wanted to explore explicitly here is we knew that erosion from boats and from the dredging that took place, partially Henry Flagler's dredging, have impacted this site, impacted the erosion, accelerated the erosion at this level. So we were trying to put a unit in at the edge of the water so we could look at impacts and what was being lost and how that process happened. But as it turned out, we learned a lot of lessons about what was under our permit and what was not under our permit, because as the tides shifted, we would have needed a DEP permit to continue digging. So LAMP is now got that part of the project under their permit so that they can investigate that. So we covered it back up and protected it. And I checked on it last week and it's still looking pretty good. But you can see Unit 8 is located not far from there. You can see just adjacent to that. And this is a really intriguing area of the site where that feature 8 came from, where we're getting some actual intact feature evidence that we would like to explore more. And it's under heavy threat of impact to erosion. So Unit 10 that you see was we put as an extension to Unit 3 because this area was really promising in terms of domestic features, and Unit 3 was the one that had a significant number of features from the Spanish period that we wanted to excavate an adjacent unit to see if we could find patterns and what those look like. Turns out you can see that we avoided the area where we'd placed 1, 6, and 7 the year before. And I'll get to that in a second. But then on the south part of this drawing, you can see units 5 and 9. 5 is the unit where we just came upon prehistoric features at the end of the field season. So that one was backfilled. And we put in another unit 9 to start. And again, try it and get to the base of that and then excavate them together as an open almost block, so we could see patterns or look for patterns in those features. Unit 5 had some really interesting prehistoric material too. It had a lot of incised orange ceramics and some pink chert tools and even a bone pin or awl of some kind. And then units 1, 6, and 7, we put in this particular location near the water because in doing some reading about the site and how it was used in the past, we'd read that there used to be a historic marker on the island. And so we thought if you were going to put one there, it looked like this was the most heavily trafficked area. The tree that you see in that top picture on the left, and that is Jack Williams and his family. They were the private landowners who bought the property from the Historical Society in 1968. And his family's picnicking there. That tree that you see there is still right there, and they're sitting about where these units are. So we thought we might find evidence of any historic marker right there, but instead we found lots of evidence of 70s campfires for the most part, and a little bit of earlier material and some other interesting things. The writing that you see at the bottom is, again, even more recent history. When we went back in 2020 to check on the site, people had put a Rubbermaid container out there, and in that Rubbermaid container were various camping supplies, some legal, some illegal, and a journal where people started keeping notes about their trips to the secret island, as you can see in quotes here. So we, of course, took that and gave it to the park, but as you can see, everyone enjoys this spot. So so there is evidence of human activity, but our campers seem to really actually, at least they really care about the site, and they're not doing subsurface impacts so far as we can tell. So briefly, I just wanted to go through some of the things that we were finding. And as I said, we're still in the stages right now of cataloging and analyzing our material from 2021, but here's some of the material from 2019, and we found more of similar types in 2021. Lots of gun flints and chert. Again, folks were at this site because it was a military fort, so that's not surprising. But the diversity and the types of flints that we're finding and the sizes of shot are really interesting, and we found some Rupert shot out at the site as well. And here's another image of some of that. We have some lead gun flint clamps for muskets. So again, these objects have the potential to really be powerful tools for engaging the public with the people who lived at this site, right? So in terms of determining the chronology of all of these, some of them we need to do some more refined analysis to make sure that they're in the right time period that we're looking for. But we know that some of them are. And one of those is one of our buttons. So one of our buttons that we have found at the site is an octagonal style. And there's an example of this in Deegan's work that talks about Spanish military buttons. So that, again, these personal touchstones that directly connect with people that we have such compelling histories for through the work of Jane Landers, and can tie these things in to create touchstones for the first free Black settlement, I think is just absolutely compelling and drives us in the work that we do. Personal items are similar in that way. This brass shoe buckle that we have is also similar to one that Deegan found out at the site. And then we have brass hooks, which were sometimes used on men's clothing, but more often used on women's clothing. So again, when we talk about forts, people often think of the men, but not about the women and children who were also at the site. That's not true at Fort Mose, because Kathy and her colleagues at Darcy McMahon have done such a brilliant job with the display they made and the representation that they have there that is multicultural and has men, women, children all together. So again, we're able to benefit from all of that work that was done previously when we look at and think through these things that we're finding. We found 3 glass beads in that area where Unit 10 where Unit 3 was, and then we found 2 more in the adjacent Unit 3. So again, a lot of domestic artifacts and personal objects that you would expect to find in domestic spaces. So we're hoping that those features help us define domestic spaces of the people who were living out there. One of the most exciting things to me was this particular bottle. This was found in that area where Unit 8, Unit 11 near the water. It was in Unit 2, which Unit 8's right next to Unit 2. And it's the bottom of Robert Turlington's Balsam of Life bottle. So this particular version, you'll see if you look at the bottle and compare it to the drawing, that balsam is spelled with an O. So they actually changed that spelling. It wasn't standardized, wasn't consistent for the market in the colonies. So 1754, that bottle, which is again, to find an object that is made in the time frame, again, doesn't necessarily mean used in the time frame, but it is found in that layer of objects associated with the first Spanish period. So this is an object that calls to mind the concern that people had about their health not being as good at the site. So we're hoping, in addition to this, we found another vial in 2021. So we want to get some soil chemistry analysis on that, so if we can tell what was in that medicine vial. And we also have collected samples of plants, so we can hope to find more evidence of what kinds of plants people were using and if they had any medicinal properties as well. And certainly the glass beads could have been used as aside from personal, not only as personal adornment, but as in African influenced ways, African influenced ways for well-being practices in addition to adornment. So we don't know that. And then again, why does, so going back to the Flagler student, why does this matter? How does this matter? And making it relevant to them. So at Flagler College, when I first went for my interview, when I came to St. Augustine for my interview, I was so excited because of course I knew about St. Augustine from Kathy Deegan's work, and my advisor is Teresa Singleton, and she had told us all about it. So I knew that if I never made it back to St. Augustine, I was going to go and see Fort Mose, and I was going to go see Kingsley. So I was telling the faculty member who was giving me this tour during my interview about this. And so he took me to Markland House on campus and said, oh, this is an antebellum house. And there was a plantation here. And he turns out that it was an antebellum house, but not associated with a plantation. And so Markland House was built by the Anderson, Dr. Andrew Anderson in 1839 amidst an extant orange grove. He was not a plantation owner, but the orange grove on his property was an extension of a former orange plantation, Yalaha, which is where the city archaeologists are working right now, owned by the Dumas family, whose home was located a quarter mile south and just north of Buena Esperanza Plantation. So after emancipation, oh, here you see Henry Flagler. There's Yalaha and Esperanza. After emancipation in 1866, freedmen Peter Sanks, Matilda Pappy, Harriet Weedman, Miles Hancock, Israel Mackenzie, Aaron DuPont, and Tom Solana leased land for $1 a year on what was then the west bank of Maria Sanchez Creek, across from the developed part of St. Augustine. So they called the community that they built Little Africa. And in 1878, when a town plot was laid out, this African-American community became known as Lincolnville. Andrew Anderson Jr. was a close friend of industrialist, railroad, and hotel magnate Henry Flagler. And after a blight decimated his orange groves, he convinced Flagler to buy his eastern groves in 1885 as the site to build his Ponce de Leon hotel. Flagler's lot was 5 acres of salt marshland prone to flooding from the Maria Sanchez Creek, and Flagler stabilized it for development by dredging land north of the city and using it to fill in the northern part of the creek. Unfortunately, the land Flagler dredged was former agricultural land for both iterations of Fort Mose, which you can see this dredging map from this map from 1943 that shows some evidence of that dredging. Its foundations partly rest on fill dirt created from pillaged segments of the historic landscape of Fort Mose. So again, I just wanted to, sometimes happens in disciplines, approaches become popular and then they fade in popularity and then they return to popularity, and people can forget that people were doing this before. So this is why I keep returning to this issue. Community-based participatory fieldwork is becoming the norm in historical archaeology right now. But when Kathy was doing it with her students and community members, it was not the norm. And so it's important, I think, to recognize the pioneers of this approach. And from the beginning, this was a community-based project at Fort Mose that involved the Black Legislative Caucus, committed local community members, researchers, and students. And a central goal was to find evidence that proved the fort was located on the grounds despite vocal detractors and local media sources and a volatile racial climate, again, of the 1960s. And the hard work of this team ultimately resulted in the establishment of Fort Mose Historic State Park. And our work builds upon those efforts through a collaborative field school that relies on partnerships with many local stakeholders to achieve common goals. So as I was saying, in 2021, we had our own additional different types of logistical challenges. We had boats to get out to the site, which made that easier to do, but challenging in terms of time constraints. This picture I'm showing you is because another challenge that we faced to our sense of community that we were foraging while working out at Fort Mose was this was July 27th, no, 25th, July 25th. And that was the day after I got home from the field. I took a test and realized that I had a breakthrough case of COVID. You can see I have my arm around Alita here, a volunteer who was one of my first field school students at Poplar Forest over 20 years ago. Everyone at our field school was vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and still we had 4 breakthrough cases. So that impacted our site. So again, when I'm talking about how we didn't get as much work done, it was for a number of logistical reasons. This shows you the path in 2019 that we walked out to the site. And the reason why we took such a long path is because the parks wanted us to avoid attracting attention to the fact that we were walking out to the site so that other people wouldn't follow us by imitation and continue making that impact worse. So we took a route that was less visible, and it took us about a half mile to get there and back. And then, as I said, in 2021, we had the boats and these fine folks from LAMP to help us get out there. And not only to get out there, I don't want to make it sound like they were just giving us rides. They were also starting their own, laying the groundwork for their own field work out there. So they want to do some work to investigate the location of Fort Mose 1, as well as the primary purpose of a grant that they have right now is to look at impacts of Hurricane Irma on 11 different sites in Florida. So that's the other reason that they were out there. We were incredibly grateful. In addition to all the stakeholders and partners I have not mentioned, and I should mention over and over again, our students, and how they are always excited and up for anything and ready to go. We are so fortunate to be able to work with them. Thunderstorms. And then when we did have things like thunderstorms, or if we did have things like logistical challenges, we use those as opportunities. So FPAN was always and ever at the ready to step in. If there was a day we were not in the field, well, how about we teach our students how to do photogrammetry? So our students are learning these skills as well. You see a student here next to Emily Jane taking photographs of the bottle, the medicine bottle that I showed you earlier. And Charlie right now is an intern with FPAN, and she's digitizing additional objects from Fort Mose and has a real interest in developing this as a career, again, based on our community partnerships that we have with these folks. So again, we're ever grateful to these wonderful students who again, I think in this process of going to a place and understanding the community and being in a place and learning about the communities that live there over time and the layers of history that connect that site or location to the location where they are as students, I don't think any of our field school students would ever ask, why should I care, right? So this is why we do this. And so that's all I'll say, and unless you have questions. And I will say, I'm sorry I don't have more dirt pictures. The other thing that I don't have to get ready for this presentation is all of our formal pictures. They have not been uploaded to our shared drive, so I couldn't show you a lot of good pictures of features and soils. But I'm happy to do that another time if you're interested. Okay, I'll stop talking.
Okay, you can unshare your screen.
There, I
Okay,
did it.
super. Well, I want to thank you for the, let me get my video going here. I want to thank you for the lecture is very interesting. There were a few people who were questioning, sending some questions on the chat. Anyone can unmute themselves and just ask, and we'll hopefully get an answer for you. So we'll leave it up to you guys. Just unmute yourself and you're in business.
Oh, that's so nice. So somebody who is in the group shot is watching from home. That's awesome. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yep.
This is Kathy.
Hi.
Hi, Lori. I'm not on view because I'm eating pizza and it's not pretty. But thank you for that. I actually learned a lot about some of the background of Fort Mose from hearing all of the work you've done on Flagler and Jack Williams and all of that. But I'm just curious, this feature 8 that you had that you now dated to the second Spanish period, what do you think it was?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. We found another feature this year. They found it actually when I was in the house with COVID. So I only got pictures. That's why I'm immensely frustrated about not having the actual photographs from the photographs of record from the site, because I wanted to see how that photograph related to how that feature related to that first one. So if I could get a better sense of what it was. There's still some of that soil is still being analyzed as well. So I'm not sure.
Was it really rectangular?
It was, but again, we didn't get all of it because it went into the wall, as you saw. It was very rectangular. I kept looking at those images when we went back to it to see, like, looking at the walls, wall images, wall profiles to see. We know that there were, well, we all know that there were some digging done out there prior to the 70s. And so I was looking to see if there were disturbed soils that weren't noticed as we were digging, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The stratigraphy is still in place in the wall. So there was one document that I was reading about in the second Spanish period that that location is sort of the southwest corner, where the southwest corner was, which is eroded away. You know this, but there was some discussion of some cannons that were placed there in the second Spanish period. So I wondered if that was dug out to put that cannon there. But I don't know for sure. I would really like to see that that new feature that came up at the end of summer.
Interesting. Thanks.
Fred White was one of the founders in 1986 to 87. That's amazing. See, it's a community. It's all a community-based everything here, which is, it's beautiful. Other questions? Oh, what is a shell lens? A shell lens is, so a lens is a deposit, here, that I was going to show you. It's a layer. It's like a thin layer. But it can be a layer of soil. It can be a layer of ash. It can be a layer of charcoal, and we call that a lens. That layer. So it's not a natural form of stratigraphy. It's from a human activity, like the charcoal lens or the shell lens. So this layer that was a result of people discarding shells would create a shell lens. Does that make sense? Or fires, you could creating fires over time in a place like we saw with those 70s campfires. We had an immense shell lens, ash lens there from many, many campfires that took place out there with exploded Budweiser bottles and that kind of thing in them.
Yeah, Lori, I have a question. Does the state park own all that land now?
The state park does own that land. From what I hear, the neighbors immediately to the sort of southwest, part of that area that's park boundary and private land boundary is contested by the people who own the adjacent property. So when we went, for instance, when we went out there, so anytime we go out there, we do not just show up out there, we get permission. Although private citizens can go up to the site, if you go there by boat, you can go onto the island. But we always make sure that we get permission to go and they know we're going to be out there and what we're doing out there. So we went out there to see if that Unit 11 was further impacted. So I wanted to pay attention and while I was out there and see what the erosion levels were around the island. So, and to see if some of that seagrass was growing back up where we had walked on that trail, and it is. So I was taking a picture of that. And as I was doing that, there were two men standing at the edge of that private property, like this, just watching us. So yeah, I think, yeah, and if you go into the parking lot at Fort Mose and look to your right, they've developed that more and more. I mean, the whole city's developing, but they've developed it more and more, and in a way that seems passive aggressive in some ways. So there is some contested ownership, but yes, the state park does own that land where Fort Mose 2 is. Absolutely. I guess another sad related tale is at Christmas time, Sarah got a call from FWC because someone was looting about 300 meters north of Fort Mose, and there's a historic bottle dump out there. So we went out there to check into that, and that part of the land it looked like a lunar landscape almost. It had been so impacted. So I feel like there are not enough people to do the kind of oversight that you need to do to really protect that space. So there's that tricky thing about, so you can see why they want people to see us going out there and follow us out there. Although you also have the issue that people are coming out there anyway. So it's very complicated. Yes, faunal remains. Alex Diaz asked if we found any faunal remains. So Kathy and her students found faunal remains, and we did as well. Our field methods were a little bit different. The screen size, the mesh we used was 1/8 inch as opposed to 1/16 inch. It wasn't as fine as what Kathy and her students were using, but we did still find a lot of evidence about the faunal remains, and we found very detailed information about the kinds of fish that were being found. My cat is on top of my faunal report and not happy that I'm moving him. But if you really want to know, Alex, I can send you a copy of the details of the report. So we know that people out there, again, in terms of diet and health and well-being, which I'm very interested in, they were being provisioned with cow and pork, and we find that in terms of abundance, that it's pig and cow first, but in terms of the number of individual specimens, or it's really 6 different types of fish that we have out there. There's turtle. We had a not a rattlesnake. We had a snake fang this year. And so in 2019, I don't know, Kathy, do you remember finding, we have some really small shark's teeth. We had 2 from 2019, but we had several more this year, and they're the tiniest little things I've seen. I don't know.
Remember exactly what, but Betsy Wrights did
Yeah.
write that up. So Alex can
Yes.
look it up.
Yeah, I do have that. I have Betsy Wright, and I should say again, another person who needs to be mentioned for her work on this site. Betsy Wright did a phenomenal job, and that work has been so important in helping people understand diet in this area, in this region. So again, the things that we found, we're just really building on top of that.
Do you plan to go out there again this summer with a student group?
Yes, we do plan to go back out again. So we applied for a grant for our fieldwork last summer, an American Battlefields Protection Program grant. And because of COVID and everything else, it was actually 2 weeks after field school ended that they said, oh, you got funding for this field school. So we have funding for the field school, and what we want to do, the way we envisioned it in 2019, we wanted to grow it in a few ways. We wanted to develop an oral history component to it, to get these stories of people who've been involved and engaged with this project for so long, right? And to help with Fort Mose Historical Society collect those, and doing that through Lincoln Museum and in partnership with the oral history program at UF. So our grant will help us do that. We're going to start that project this year. And the other thing we wanted to do is make the fieldwork accessible to people who may not necessarily be able to attend field school because of financial or other barriers. And so we have some funding in place to actually pay for 5 people to come to field school, because field school can be really cost prohibitive, and having to leave your job, pay for tuition, and pay for a place to stay can really keep people from being able to participate. So we're hoping to really diversify our student body by the money that we applied for that grant. So that's what that money's for.
Super. Are there any other questions? Well, if not, I want to thank you again, and
Yeah, thanks
thank
for having me.
everyone for joining us. Just a reminder again, the next meeting will be the 5th of April. Stay tuned if it's going to be live, or we'll Zoom it again, or we'll do both. So we don't know at this point, but we have the date firm. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll end the meeting. And again, thank you for joining.
Thanks.
Thank you. Very well. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.